Hello everybody and welcome to this video in which I'm going to talk about two games and a topic which is pretty sobering and frankly quite depressing and frustrating. I think just about everybody out there knows that we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. That goes without saying. COVID-19 is really changing the world, and I look at scenes like people refusing to self-isolate because they want to go and party on a beach for their summer holiday, or scenes of people fighting over toilet paper because they want to hoard as much as possible, and I get very upset by these things. I get very angry. I think that the people are not listening to experts. They are not doing the right thing by the rest of society. The politicians are particularly weak at the moment, and we're kind of facing the consequences of having a generation of really poor political leadership. We have the wrong set of prime ministers and presidents across the world to handle what is going on at the moment. And while this is a video game based YouTube, this is not a topic that we can really ignore. So before I start to talk about these games, I do want to encourage everyone to actually do the right thing. Stay at home, make sure you're not hoarding supplies, do what the experts are suggesting, and just exercise common sense. If we don't get over this COVID-19 thing quickly, it is going to go on forever. The only way we're going to get on top of it is if people actually do the right thing. So, lecture aside, let's talk about a couple of games. They're pretty pertinent actually to the topic of COVID-19, and as a result they haven't been particularly comfortable to play. They just really hit hard to home at the moment. But in isolation, they're both incredible games that everybody should actually play anyway. Even more so now because they give you a sense of what's kind of really at stake. And while these are fantasy games and they're not exactly modelled on reality, they do show a side of reality. Like I said, they do hit home, and the themes that are being expressed through these games are very pertinent, and people should be paying attention. Perhaps if people who are partying in Miami right now had played these two games beforehand, they might have thought twice about doing something so absolutely ridiculously irresponsible. But the two games are Plague Inc., which you'll see on the screen in a little bit, and Pathologic 2, which is just released on PlayStation 4, so I finally had a chance to play it after people recommending it to me for a long time on PC, and it is pretty amazing. Pathologic 2 tells a pretty grim story about a doomed town that gets caught in the midst of a plague, and basically you play as a character who has returned to this town after being away from quite a while, and you're instantly attacked by a bunch of people that are paranoid and delusional, and as you explore the town more, you come to realize that basically the entire town is taken over by this abject horror at what's going on around them. And your job is to basically try to survive, work out what's happened to your father because he was killed. And yeah, I'm not too far into this game. I haven't done a review because I find it very difficult to play, so I'm playing it in very short bursts. When I say I find it difficult to play, it is a challenging game for one thing, but on top of that, it's also a pretty emotionally dense game at the moment. And so I haven't got too far into it, but right away there's some real qualities about this game that everybody should experience. Firstly, it is very surrealistic and very theatrical, so it doesn't follow typical storytelling techniques for video games. It's quite esoteric. It takes a while to really even start to think that you're understanding what's going on. The conversations are very stilted in that very theatrical way, and it's a very obtuse game. It takes a while to get into. It's magnificent from the outset, so even though you don't understand what's going on and you don't necessarily follow what's actually happening in the game, right from the start there's something about it that really hooks you in. It's that surrealistic bent to it that it looks a little bit funny, I guess, to watch short clips of it in isolation, but all of these funny masked characters and all this weird stuff that happens, it builds and builds, and there's an intensity to the atmosphere of the game which is just very hard to stomach for one thing, but also very hard to put down. I don't know how long it'll take me to get through this game. Like I said, I can only play it in short bursts, but the time that I'm playing in it, I'm not having fun in the conventional sense, but I'm really being intellectually challenged, emotionally challenged, and this game is really kind of showing you what paranoia in a world that has been overcome by plague would look like, and we are just starting to see the very edge of that in our world now. People fighting over toilet paper in supermarkets. It's going to escalate. That's just stage one of many, many stages. You're talking about a plague, a pandemic. You're talking about a pandemic that's not going to go away quickly. We're looking at a year of this, and it's just going to get worse before it gets better. And I think that people don't appreciate that and don't really understand just how bad it's going to get. And I think a game like Pandemic, kind of shows you where the end game to all this lies if it's a worst case scenario and people don't really do what they should be doing and helping deal with the issue. The other one was a great fun game to play that I really enjoyed on both Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4 for years, right up to basically January, and that is Plague Inc. Plague Inc. is kind of a strategy game of sorts, and your goal is to basically start a virus, and at the start it's barely more than a cough or a bit of a headache, and from there you need to mutate it, and you need to get the infection into people so it starts to spread. You pick one country at the start, and if you do the right things and you pick the right symptoms and the right carrier methods, then it will start to spread beyond that first country. And yeah, your goal is to wipe out humanity. So in this context, it's pretty grim. And again, this has been a game that has been uncomfortable for me to play since, because again, it kind of tracks along with how things are going in the real world. This game has a model for the behavior of populations through pandemics, and for the longest time, humanity doesn't really respond. When it's just a cold, it dismisses it as being a minor issue. One country might start to invest in some mild research into that pandemic, but it doesn't, it's not a big investment, and it would take forever for a cure to be found from that one country. As more and more countries start to get infected, and then people start to die from that disease, that's when they start to up the investment into the science. But that then gets compromised because society starts to break down around them. At the start of the game, you have this lovely map with planes flying around everywhere, ships moving from port to port, transporting goods. People are moving around. Everybody's basically happy. I mean, you don't see people on the map, but there's a sense that the world is kind of content with where it's at. But as the game goes on, the number of planes slow down, the number of ships slow down, some countries start to close their borders, civil unrest starts to creep in with the more infected countries, so by the time the kill numbers, the death rate hits certain points, you start to have anarchy, and once a country becomes an anarchy, once the kind of political control over the country leaves, then that country's contribution to research into finding a cure stops, and then the rate at which a cure can be found slows down, and eventually, if you play your cards right, the world runs out of time and the entire population dies while still trying to find a cure. Along the way, you get all these little factoids that pop up that show you how your disease is going in comparison to other major diseases such as the common cold and smallpox and all of that kind of stuff. And something kind of really hits you home then. There is a point early on in the game where the infection rate will go past what a common cold has achieved, if achieved is the right word, and at that point humanity's still not that concerned by the disease. There's a little bit of research going on, but there isn't a sense that the world is panicking, there's no anarchies breaking out and stuff like that, even though, because you're the one manipulating the disease, it's going to get a lot worse. So I guess that goes to show you in this game's modelling that responses to diseases are quite slow, and there seems to be a hesitation within humanity, within some kind of principle of humanity, that people don't tend to take this stuff too seriously until it becomes a critical threat. And we've already seen that as well with the likes of climate change, that people aren't taking that, or haven't been taking that particularly seriously, until we've started to see bushfires wipe out, half of entire countries, as happened with Australia earlier in this year. It has now been 6 months where those of us in Australia haven't had any relief from one disaster after another. We moved straight from having issues with the bushfires and 1 billion animals dying from wide-scale fires that destroyed entire communities. We've moved straight from that to now having the pandemic start to sweep through our country as well. So it's been exhausting. 6 months has been exhausting, and you can feel the fabric of society starting to break down. I mean, we had our Prime Minister up the other day actually lecturing the entire country about hoarding, and while what he was saying was entirely accurate, and people who do hoard at times like this are pretty scummy people, it's the lecturing tone, and it's the sense that there's this kind of desperation within the political class to get control of all this. It's worrying, to say the least. You can see where the anarchy that Plague Inc. predicts is going to come from. And like I said, until earlier this year, Plague Inc. was a game that I just enjoyed playing because it is a well-crafted strategy game with a nice balance between challenge and accessibility, and it was fun to play around with. There's all these kinds of fun little scenarios that they've built in there, from global addictions to board games to vampire diseases and all that stuff. This game doesn't take itself too seriously. Unfortunately, the models that the game uses as a basis we probably should take seriously, because they seem to be very accurate. And I've been watching on Twitter and Facebook and all that, and Plague Inc. is obviously a popular game, so a lot of people know about it. When I saw the headlines pop up earlier in the week that Greenland had registered its first case of COVID-19 in the real world, there were a bunch of people that said, well, that's the last challenge for the disease in Plague Inc., because Greenland is notoriously difficult to infect with the disease in this game, because often it will close its borders before the disease gets in there, and humanity will survive as a result, because that one country will manage to escape having any incidences of the disease come into it. So people are seeing that association between Plague Inc. and COVID-19. Yes, they're making jokes about it, but again, in this game, people didn't take the disease too seriously until it was too late as well. I would suggest that while I'm not going to predict the end of the world, I don't think COVID is going to kill the entire planet. It's going to have a serious effect, and people need to start taking this quite seriously. And once again, stop going to the bloody beach, stay indoors. It's boring as hell, I know. I'm stuck inside as well. Find hobbies, find ways to entertain yourself inside, but stay out of contact with other people and do the right thing. Anyway, not a pleasant video, but a pertinent one, and I promise you I'll be back to just talking about games and stuff with the next ones. Do play these games anyway, they're good fun. Please do like and subscribe, because that helps, and please do back me on Patreon if you enjoy my videos. We will see you at the next one, and thanks as always for watching.